Welcome to Practice Not Perfect, a new podcast exploring the place of practice in the spiritual life, rooted in the Christian tradition. I am here today with Carmen Acevedo Butcher. Dr. Butcher is a scholar published in the area of linguistics, a professor teaching writing at UC Berkeley. She is also a mystic and a student of the mystical life, publishing books on women mystics, on Saint Benedict, on Hildegard of Bingen. I became aware of her work through her translation of The Cloud of Unknowing. Her most recent book is a translation of Brother Lawrence and his practice of the presence of God. Carmen, welcome. Is there anything else you would like people to know about you?
That's wonderful, James. You covered it all, and I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, I am so excited to be with you as well. I do want to tell a little story. When I was thinking about launching this podcast, I put it out on Facebook of like, hey, any suggestions? And then my thought was, hey, I want to do something on, I think all I said was that I want to do something on Christian spirituality, but I said, I want to do something on practice. And I opened up my DMs and I had a message from you saying, podcast sounds a good idea. And I would come and talk about the practice of the presence. And I was like, oh, this is serendipity. This is what, in my evangelical days, I would definitely call a God moment. So I thought, well, hey, I need to do this. So thank you for coming on and being my first person on the podcast, and also confirming the shape of what I want to do. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'm delighted, James, because one of the things I had noticed about your Twitter page, this is like one of the great things about Twitter.
Yeah.
I know it sometimes gets the other sort of reputation, but you had on there bootleg pastor, because that was kind of really, your spirit really comes across in Twitter. And then you had believer in radical welcome of God in the way of Jesus. And I thought, and you have a really kind of sort of accessibly intelligent, intellectual sort of and very embodied approach, because I can tell you care about people. And so that all made me think of Brother Lawrence. And I thought I would love to have a conversation. I actually, my first thought was, because I was about to launch Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence, my translation, I actually thought, I wonder if he would have time to read my translation, because I thought I didn't even know you that well, yet, but I thought I would like to know what James thinks about it. And so that has been one of the greatest gifts, is our Twitter messaging, which I have kept. Let's just tell people who are listening, I've kept it. I have it in a file, all your observations. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. So I do want to get into the book, but I wanted to ask, since this is broadly themed on spiritual practice, my podcast, I thought it'd be kind of fun to ask some practice questions to begin with.
Yeah.
But so what's one thing in your life that you've practiced a lot? Now, that could be you've learned an instrument or played a sport or a skill you tried to master, but what's one thing that you've practiced at?
So when you say sport, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is basketball. So I played basketball all the way through high school. And I remember I was always weak on my left side, so people could guard me just my right side. And I spent an entire summer practicing just with my left hand out on a goal that we had at the end of the driveway at my parents' house. And I dribbled, I shot, and I pretended I didn't have a right hand. And by the next season, I mean, it was really awkward at first, it just didn't work. But by the end of that summer, spending 3 to 4 hours, I was a double threat, on the court. I was ambidextrous. I could, use both so well. So that's one thing. Also, I have practiced singing my whole life.
Yeah, I've heard some of your singing.
Yeah.
With
but they're similar, right? I mean, in the sense of that you do them. It's like I've often thought it's kind of like we have the monkey mind, and it has to be doing something. So I have an obsessive like gene or impulse, or I don't think I'm exactly unique in that. I think we humans, a lot of people feel that. And I remember realizing one day when I was doing Lectio Divina, so like reading scripture, and like, if you meditate on Jesus wept, that can take you places, just Jesus wept, much less some of the other very wise verses. But I just remember thinking, my mind needs to repeat itself healthily. And that, in the cloud of unknowing, he says that you can't do this too much. He says, do it gently, but you can't repeat like these scriptures too, like you do it gently, but it's not like eating too much chocolate.
Right.
which I could also really get into. But so I have sung. One of the things I learned early in my life, I don't know how I learned it, was that my name Carmen means song or poem. And so I always thought I was kind of like fulfilling my birdness, like, birds sing. And so and then that led to chanting. And so I've always done this. I think we need to be doing something physical, some kind of like, I love the title of your podcast, Practice Not Perfect. And I just think we need to be doing something that cultivates our soul, our body. I mean, they're not separate. So our soul, our body, our self, our psyche, all of that. And I think chanting Lectio Divina, meditating on scripture or other wise words, I've done all of those. And the other one, and I don't know that if sometimes people call it a practice, is walking. I guess you asked for one, but sorry. Is walking out in nature. So just walking and being open to look at that cloud, just being open to having the attention on the sacredness of nature.
Well, and I see that in some of your social media posts. You post poems and pictures of big sky country.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I do have just a follow-up practice question. If there's something that you used to do that feels out of practice now.
Wow, I've never been asked that question, James. Something I used to do. It's like everything I used to, okay, let me think. Everything I used to do, I kind of still do, but I just do it in a way that I find is more understanding or more mature. I'm not saying I'm mature. I'm not meaning really the focus on me, but one thing that I don't do. Okay, I can answer that. I used to feel guilty when I couldn't find healing just within the Christian church, because I was raised in the evangelical church, and there were some bits of that theology that I needed to heal through that hadn't been exactly helpful to me. And I really started studying anything that was helpful. So any wisdom that was helpful and also kind. Although I don't think I should have to say that. If it's helpful, it will be kind, right? And other looking and self-compassionate. And I started really being drawn to like Buddhism, that wisdom tradition. And so at first it was like kind of odd because it was like, there's no God, mentioned. And so I was kind of like, whoa, because I kind of went from Jesus to that. And it was kind of, but what I found was this calmness there, that in the hellfire and damnation sermons, or in the ways that I didn't really feel seen as a person, as a valued person, it was like, I mattered and there was sacredness in everything. And that was really giving myself the permission to, and it wasn't just Buddhism, but other faiths, other traditions, of going where the wisdom was, because it's really interesting. I had so many ways I needed to be healed, and still do. I think we're all an ongoing, or at least it seems to me.
I'm a mess, so
therapy. Well, I mean, and therapy has really been hard work. Nobody talks as much about. I went to therapy. It's like such hard work, but giving myself the permission to find the healing where I found it has been so, I mean, that was long ago when I gave myself permission for that, but it has been so healing for me. And I'm really grateful because it's really kind of like, if somebody comes and offers you medicine, it's really not the healthiest to go, are you like, do you match all my little, all my little tick boxes? And yeah, there's so much wisdom out there.
Yeah.
So much wisdom.
And I'm still very Christian in my
Yeah.
approach to things, but that when you talk about spiritual practice, I mean, the things that I've learned from Buddhism and other things about um, you know calming the mind and mindfulness, and I mean, I had a spiritual director that said, like, you know if prayer is to be fruitful, it starts with something like mindfulness. They're not in competition with one another. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm glad I asked the practice questions. But I can remember my first encounter with Brother Lawrence. I was at my grandparents' place and looking at their bookshelf, the bookshelf that was behind the chair where my grandmother watched TV. I found a old trade paperback copy of Brother Lawrence, which she let me keep. My grandmother was a fundamentalist Christian, I think at the time Pentecostal, but she was a fundamentalist in the era that really meant being anti-Catholic. So it's kind of remarkable that I found Brother Lawrence on the shelf there. But
Wow.
I was just curious. Do you? I we'll get into like how you came to translate this book, but do you remember your first encounter with Brother Lawrence?
I've been asked that once before, and I believe it was in Frank Laubach. He has this, because often in the Protestant tradition, what happens with, because you kind of have like two streams on Brother Lawrence. You definitely have the Catholic vein, and then you definitely have the Protestant vein. He's been so appealing to both. I mean, he started in the Catholic
Right.
tradition, obviously, but I believe it was in Frank Laubach because he was all over my childhood, all about he would teach literacy, or he was big in the literacy movements and such. But one of the things it seems Protestants have done often is take out pieces of Brother Lawrence and make a devotional, right? So it's not necessarily Brother Lawrence, but it's pieces of Brother, it's well-meaning, and it's for what it does what it does. And pieces of Brother Lawrence are taken out, and then the person who's writing the book sort of adds their own experience, which is but it's not the whole Brother Lawrence. So I kind of got Frank Laubach's approach to Brother Lawrence, which was about mindfulness, actually, partly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, right, because of different things. So, and it's interesting that you should bring up that about how you came to the mindfulness through Buddha, if we can go back to that, through Buddhism, because when Father Thomas Keating and everyone were trying to start centering prayer and stuff, they were like trying to fill that hole where that was in the beginning. Christianity did have meditation. And I mean, if you go to the Old Testament, it talks about meditate like a dog chewing a bone.
Right.
I mean, you cannot take a bone from a dog.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gnawing that obsessive in a good way, right? So yeah, but I do believe it was in Frank Laubach in a devotional. And so, as I like to say, I'd only read him in translation. But still, but it's interesting too, because I wonder which translation it was that I think it's so fascinating that your grandmother had that.
Yeah, so I looked on my shelf. I don't think I have the same book anymore.
Yeah.
I think it was the the 100-year-old
Fleming Revell, maybe Fleming Revell or something.
I think it was a Whitaker one, but
okay.
But so I mean, I think it's Allenson or whoever.
Yeah.
But and you're right, like completely edited, like when the letters are written, they take out the Catholic references that you don't know he's writing to a nun because there's no.
Oh, you noticed that?
Yeah.
I will definitely say I noticed this tendency.
Yeah.
Can we just say right up front, the fact that your grandmother had Brother Lawrence, the fact that, like Aldous Huxley said, there are people who are even not interested in this kind of stuff, love Brother Lawrence, I just think it's so fascinating that people love Brother Lawrence so much that they make him completely theirs. So it's like, oh, we don't really want to have nuns in the letters. So we'll just take those out because it's not part of our tradition, right? I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, that but I mean but he's been done that too without any like anybody saying. It's just like he's part of the family, It's just I love it. Yeah, he's like he won't mind. I mean, nobody thinks he'll even mind. It's just like, it's Brother Lawrence. He's sweet, he's good, and he's so accessible. I think that is a huge compliment to Brother Lawrence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, that's kind of his universal appeal, is how accessible this is. And
yeah.
So yes, I want to hear the story of how you came to translate this now. So
that's interesting because, when I'm asked this, I always feel I should have an answer that includes, well, it was on my 25-year life plan. It's like, so you said earlier, your life's a mess. I'm like, I could echo that and can echo that. My life's a mess too. So, I have a friend who's an editor, and I met this friend who's an editor through someone who graduated from my college who knew this person. And I met her because I was trying to publish my dissertation on Alfred of Enisham, an Old English, Benedictine monk. And I pitched this book, with great enthusiasm, because doesn't everybody want to read about this Benedictine monk's sermons on John? I mean, I did. And my friend Lil, now this editor, said, yeah, we don't do that, but I like your writing. So I think this is a thing always I'm telling students. You learn to write, not to write correctly. You learn to write so that one day, if somebody doesn't want your idea, they still like your writing and they want to have more to do with you, right? She said, but I like your writing, so could you pitch something else? So I pitched something else. And we did a book together at Paraclete Press. And then we just became friends, somehow. When you work with somebody as an editor, and they say things like, so this is like my favorite line ever. I haven't thought about it in a while. Carmen, Lil said at one point, over here, I would follow you anywhere. But this is wooden over here. You're just dying, like you've worked so hard on, how it is, you've worked so hard on something. And for somebody to say it's wooden, I've never forgotten that. And the thing is, she was right. And so we became friends over the years. And so this is like almost 20 years ago now. And so we did another book. And then I did Cloud for Shambhala.
Yeah.
Because Paraclete had already done one or something.
Yeah.
And when I contacted Shambhala, they said, oddly, wow, we were just looking for somebody to do that. And wow. Yes, okay. And were you also planning on translating the Privy Council? And I was like, to myself, no. And to them, yes. But anyway, because I could tell they wanted both. So that was part of the deal. And so Lil kept saying to me over the years, want to talk about a book and do another book. And then she changed publishing houses, and then my dad died, and there was that for a while to, do things with, and just emotionally, I didn't have the bandwidth. And then we moved from Georgia to California. My husband moved first, and Lil would occasionally check in and say, do you want, and I'd be like, I'm trying to sell my house. My husband's in California. Yeah. And so it was just like, and yet, because we're good friends, she kept, in a really sweet way, checking in, And so about March of 2020, and the only reason I remember the date really is because, it's tied with the pandemic now.
Yeah.
But March of 2020, I got a message. You know how it is when you have different social media accounts. I don't remember which one, but a message on social media saying, want to talk about a book. And for some reason it landed, and I said, yes. So we talked, and Lil is an ideas person. She's really a genius. And she threw out, I just remember taking all these notes and stuff, because we don't record conversations. So I typed in all these notes, and so many good ideas and blah, blah, blah. And then at the very end, we were about to close The Way Life Works, and she's like, or there's also Brother Lawrence. And just like with The Cloud of Unknowing, nobody mentioned the cloud to me, but there was a little tug in my heart about the cloud, and it didn't go away. And when she said Brother Lawrence, I didn't dare tell her, because I wasn't sure, would his theology be healthy? Would I be able to translate him? Because I've never translated French before. So that's kind of like, I love diving off the high dive and wondering if, and so I went, oh yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, okay. So then I went away, and I know this because I was asked this recently, and for about 3 or 4 months, I worked on a draft, or to see if I could even do it. And what happened was, I started with his spiritual maxims and his letters, because I thought, I need to find out if Brother Lawrence is all that. Okay, so I just have to tell you something. I'd only read Brother Lawrence, like we were talking about, in translation. And so that means I don't know if I'm reading that Catholic person's version of Brother, or that Protestant person's, or whatever. And I wanted to know who really was Brother Lawrence. And when you get into people's words, you really get into who they are. I'll tell you about the first couple of spiritual maxims. I was gone. Yeah. I was like, this man. And then, because I always have all the other translations open. And the thing is, I don't buy them all at once, but I kind of gather them, kind of like barnacles to a ship. Yeah. And so over time, but I knew which ones were the major ones. So I had those at the beginning, and I had the critical edition. And I didn't quite find his vibrant, beyond dualism. I just didn't quite. So, because I had childhood trauma, and I went out into nature, because where else could I go? Mm-hmm. There was a sacredness there that was healing for me, and that was, like you said, a radical welcome. What Mary Oliver says, trees saved her. Mm-hmm. And I found in Brother Lawrence that wide open, radical welcome. And when I looked at the translations, and I would not really want to translate Brother Lawrence without the earlier translations. They're like friends. Yeah. They like accompany you. But at the same time, I didn't find him there the way I felt him when I was reading him.
Wow.
And so I was taken. So I was getting up every day at 4:30. I was teaching that summer full-time online, and students' parents were dying. There were essential workers on the front lines. And so there was a lot. I'm not a pastor, James, but there's a kind of a pastoral element to listening to students talk about things like that are so grief and profound, and trying to recommend who they could talk to, see and stuff, since you're just a teacher and all. And one of the things was, I thought to myself, I want to do this, because the main thing was, if Brother Lawrence is what I thought he could be, then I moved out to Joseph, and it really was just like eating potato chips, like barbecue Lay's potato chips. It was just, every morning I got up and people were dying. My best friend's father died because of COVID. And, every morning I'd get up, there were no car sounds on the road. It was just bird song. And every morning I got up, and there was a hopefulness, because I started thinking of him as Nick, because, his name was Nicolas Herman, or what we would say, Nicholas Herman. Yeah. But it really would have been Nicolas Herman. But I used to think, here I am, Nick, good to see you. And because even when he became Brother Lawrence, he was still Nick. He was still a human. He never lost that groundedness. And I was just taken with him. But I didn't tell my friend Lil, because I wasn't through yet, And so then when I got done, and Lil says this too, because we talked about it, because there was a newspaper reporter asked us about it. And this was Lil's take on it too. And then I asked for a meeting in August or so and said, I'm done with the rough draft and I'd like to do it. And that's when Lil said, so we'll have to write a proposal and hope it gets accepted, type of thing. I was like, really? It's like, there's always a hurdle, and then of course it wasn't done because that was just a rough draft.
Sure.
But that's how it happened. This time it was Lil's idea. And I just felt really fortunate because it was healing to spend this time in friendship with Brother Lawrence, because I am not naturally a calm person. And in fact, I've dealt with severe anxiety most all my life. And, trying not to give into it, but also trying to accept the fact that this is something that is part of me that I sort of like work with. If Pema Chodron's here, she's saying this is part of my fuel for my path, so to speak. And I just found the calmness in Brother Lawrence was endless.
Yeah.
And resonated also with, because he had trauma from war, and who knows what kind of trauma from that. He had trauma from being really an outcast, non-privileged sort of quote nobody to society in the 17th century. He had severe anxiety, but he practiced. I mean, this is perfect for even without me, James, is perfect for your first podcast, because his practice, his minute daily moment by moment practice is what grew in him that calmness that I entered like a cathedral or like a grove of, trees. And it was for me healing during the pandemic. And they say, if you write something and you're crying while you write it, like, so to speak, like if it's a love story and so on, then your reader will cry. And all I know is that while I was translating that, it was an absolute calmness in me. Entering it was a calmness. And I hope, and I used to, because, you say a little short prayer before you start doing your translating. And while you're doing it, especially when you hit the knots, it's like when fishing line gets in a knot, because I used to fish a lot. Sometimes in a translation, you hit a fishing line knot where you're just like, and I would just be like, so I'd have these little prayers, but even in those moments where it was like, what do I do here? It's like his book is so soaked and saturated in a juicy kind of calmness.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of your previous books, that your Hildegard book, you mentioned that your translating was like spending a year in Lectio Divina with Hildegard. Did you feel that with Brother Lawrence too, or was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd even forgotten I said that, but that's true.
Yeah.
It's almost like, how I'm sure everybody has a person that when they're with them, they feel different and they feel blessed. It could be a teacher or a family member, but like somebody, when you're in their presence is so healthy and enlivening that even if you only met them once, you're sort of forever changed. And if you get to spend, it's like the lineage thing, like the mentorship, the like passing down, the wanting to get somebody's cloak, and wear it. Like I still have from my teacher in Germany, who I met just through friends, Mother Bushbeck. I still have her shawl she gave me, and I wear it sometimes because it's like, but I definitely think, I totally, you've nailed it there. That spirit of calmness is like spending time, but he's not like teaching. It's not like, how can I put this, James? It's not like Brother Lawrence teaches you by intellect. It's not like he's trying to give you a test and give you some words, and it's not like a class. It's definitely like entering into his presence, which is, it is the presence of God, and or divinity, or however anyone wants to think of the mystery of love. And it was definitely like spending time with him, but I didn't have questions for him. It's not like, because like you read in there, I have to say, when you read in the book that the brothers are always gathering around his bedside when he was sick and stuff, and they're always asking him questions, even then, always kind of reminds me of Job, I mean, not to talk against the brothers, but you know how Job, when his friends show up and they're kind of pestering him, it wasn't like I had questions for Brother Lawrence. It was like just being with him was enough.
Yeah.
So yes. Yes.
I think that's true. And I mean, I guess that's my experience with him too, is it's not that he doesn't have things to tell me, but it's that I don't feel preached at when I read Brother Lawrence. I feel this opening up of presence. So
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different space. And the other thing about it to me is that one of the reasons that it's like that juicy calmness, is I think he somehow had a lived Trinitarian theology. So that was one thing that I became aware of, because I didn't have words for it. But I even did searches through his text to see when he said Jesus, when he said God the Father or parent, and when he said the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And I found out that he absolutely adores, of course, Mary too. Sure. Adores Mary, which is big. I think that's an important point. But he really adores Jesus. But they're all part of the package of his experience of God, of the divinity, and how he lives that out. And I had to go to theologians. Really good theologians are so helpful in helping us live things better, live love better. And Ann Hunt was one of them. And so I think that's why we feel this embodiment, is because, because not all faiths have this lived Trinitarian understanding. Christianity has this, but as Ann Hunt says, usually Christianity doesn't do much with it.
Yeah.
Like it's a intellectual idea of 3 in 1, whatever that might mean. But Brother Lawrence somehow lives it. And that, when we get invited, it's one reason that I put at the beginning, it's one reason it drew me down into a rabbit hole, because all of a sudden I started realizing, oh my God, he wrote this with a quill pen. The ink came from an oak tree. Then when it was made into a book, all of a sudden you just start seeing nothing is separate. Nothing in Brother Lawrence's world, everything is interdependent. Everything. So I thanked Brother Lawrence and also the WASP that helped make the ink for him to write his book. It became very, it's so not intellectual. Have you ever noticed? I used to be, I would still probably say I'm a recovering this. I don't know what the word for is it, but you know how it's easier to protect ourselves by approaching faith and things like spirituality through the intellect. We can kind of protect so I used to be an expert at that, and didn't know it, so it gives me some sympathy for, when I see online these big kind of conversations, and I'm like, I get kind of tired because I think, could we just go chant and, maybe go help someone who's hungry or something? Eventually, just this apologetics and such is just a bit tiring. And one of the things about Brother Lawrence that I absolutely love is that what you said, you don't feel preached at, but you feel this presence where, as he writes himself, anything is possible.
Yeah.
Anything. In this embodiment, right?
I think I said this to you online, but they're like mystics. They inhabit this, other country where they meet God, but they're not all the same. So we have like the important mystics, and so mystics that were important to Brother Lawrence too, like Teresa and Saint John of the Cross. That Saint John ascending up a mountain, and Teresa with her going into the castle, and then you have others like the ladder of perfection, and the I think of all the staircases in Catherine of Siena, and And here we have the cookies on the low shelf that everybody can get at it. Um, it is as simple as taking your heart and and having an intentional turn towards God and experiencing God in that. Um, and there are Brother Lawrence is not alone. I mean, you translated the cloud, and in a sense, the cloud does that, although almost in spite of itself. um, and another Carmelite, the little way of Saint Therese is of Lisieux is very similar in that sense. But I think this is, I wonder if this is all rooted um, in Brother Lawrence's life as somebody who was born poor, part of the Third Estate um, and he was and these are all things I've learned from your introduction, but he was a war veteran from the 30 Years War, injured for life, and it got worse as he aged. He, probably because of that, suffered PTSD. He wrote in the time of the plague and of a climate disaster, which was a little ice age. So, what you said, like a third of the population of the world died because of that. And just thinking that whole inhabiting this space of hardship and sorrow and really kind of finding himself in that. So I mean, I guess that's not even a question. So I'm sorry, I just had to say that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to say what James said. That's absolutely beautiful and true. And when you wrote me that on Twitter, you said that Lawrence, on the other hand, puts the cookies on the bottom shelf where everyone can reach them. And experiencing the presence of God is as simple as an intentional turn toward love. And I do absolutely agree with you. And I think you beautifully laid it out, that it's rooted in his life of trauma and his disability that he lived with for 50 something years. And that you so well point out worsened as he aged until the last 2 years, he couldn't even walk. And in an age without, like Tylenol and things. So, or any understanding of modern medicine. So yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's one reason that I love him. And it's kind of like his humility is not that of the humble brag.
Yeah.
It's not mixed in with how do we handle social media and that kind of attention economy. It's his humility is so real that it does. This is why some of my friends who are Tibetan teachers,
Yeah.
like Lama Yeshe Rose, they're like, I love Brother Lawrence because he's so the uncarved block. He's so much the genuine humility, and you really can't fake that. That's the thing. That's what I think has carried him through the centuries. Is that it's kind of like my mother could not afford to go to college, and when she reads something and shares it with me, it's absolutely brilliant. Do you understand? Like when she'll read a book and she'll share, and I'm like, mother, but she doesn't think she's smart, doesn't have that reference of, how am I presenting myself? And I've learned that the way Brother Lawrence presents spirituality and such, he doesn't have that filter of that sort of, I don't know what we're trying to describe here, but it's a kind of humility without any artifice at all. And it's just pure joy in the simplicity. And it doesn't have that, because I guess, I love John of the Cross too, but I hear what you're saying. He always talks about the methodless method, right? So to speak. And think about it. He makes God's love so accessible that, like he even says, you don't have to always be in church to worship God. His approach is very, how can we put it? It really does cut out the middleman, the middle woman. I mean, it's very, God's love is accessible to everyone. That radical welcome you were talking of, and it's not. But the thing is, he's often described during his time as being not educated, because those who are educated are seeing him as not educated. But is he smart? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is my mom smart? So what I'm saying is, he doesn't have that privileged point of view of things, because you notice, James, when they talk about, sometimes Brother Lawrence was required to answer official questions by people in the church. And Joseph says, and when he did a great job. He answered complex questions because, they had the quietest. Mm-hmm. So he was really, really smart, but he was also genuinely humble. So that's what I loved it when you said he puts the cookies on the bottom shelf, and he doesn't say only take one. So this reminds me, I once met Cardinal Basil Hume in England when I was a student there. My husband was being baptized, and he just happened to be in the church that day giving a speech, Cardinal Basil Hume. And he told the story that he's written about, that, God is the one who, when you go into the kitchen and you sneak in to get the extra cookie that your mother told you maybe don't have more, and you reach up to the secret place where the cookies are kept, and you open the jar really quietly and you reach in for one more cookie, God walks in the room and says, and you think, oh no, and you start to put the cookie back and says, why don't you take two? So your cookie analogy, I thought, was absolutely beautiful, because our minds are beautiful things, right? But they can trip us up sometimes when they make the world into a this or that.
Yeah.
Or a you and me, or a us and them. Yeah.
So I love that you say this humility of Brother Lawrence, but I want to say that coupled with that is this sense of self, that Brother Lawrence knows who he is. And another thing I learned from your book was, yes, he is shaped by this Carmelite spirituality and by this rhythms of prayer and work that you find in a monastery, but the time set apart for mental prayer didn't do it for him. And he spent 10 years in the monastery, probably bucking up against what he was supposed to be doing and supposed to be experiencing. And you say he really had a dark night of the soul. But by the time he's having these conversations with Joseph and writing down the spiritual maxims and writing these letters, he knows who he is, and he knows how and where he's experienced the divine. And it's just really beautiful to read. So
that's interesting you point that out, because you're right. When we read Brother Lawrence's Practice of the Presence, we get the most mature Brother Lawrence, and he's looking back on his earliest struggles. Yeah, you're exactly right. He had a sense of self, and it comes through in the writing, because nobody tells him what to think. I mean, he takes the good from, yes, Teresa and from John, and he makes it his own. And he really does lean into these concepts of we stumble. I mean, he doesn't do the church thing that Joseph does occasionally. And I love Joseph, his friend Joseph. Yeah. I think when you read about Joseph, you see that he also helped the poor, and he was really active as a churchman. Mm-hmm. But Joseph also has the church party line a bit, that he has to kind of watch out for. And Brother Lawrence doesn't. And he doesn't talk about sinner versus saint and good versus evil. And he's all about this bonte, this kind God that was often rendered just good, the good God. And Brother Lawrence is all about we stumble. And when you think about he limped for 50 years. And he does use the French verb tomber there for like we have the word tumble. I really appreciate that because I know I stumble. And what he means by that is when we're not true to ourselves, when we harm others. And then he doesn't take it lightly that you just ask for forgiveness and your life goes on. It's not like that. It's more this mature understanding of atoning and being better, doing better, like being kinder, causing less harm. It's not like you get off scot-free. It's like asking for forgiveness. But the interesting thing is when you do, how kind God is in those situations when, but you're right. He does say, I love it when he says, he's kind of, the cloud of unknowing anonymous is really can be short, but Brother Lawrence can also be kind of like, yeah, people told me, and like in letter 2, people told me I needed to do this and this and this and this and this and that. And then he just says, that didn't work for me. Like you said, he just goes, but I didn't do any of that. I didn't do that. That didn't work for me. And then he also says things like, nobody wants to talk about this too much because I think spiritual direction's great, counseling, all this stuff. But he does say, yeah, I needed to somebody to forgive me for my stumblings and such, but I knew what was going on. I didn't really need a spiritual director. He's kind of like very much, but I do think maybe he did see a spiritual director. But what I mean is he was very much saying these things cluttered my way. He does use that word, like he says, this is clutter for me, all of this stuff. And I think he's in pain every day.
Yeah.
Right? On the days when I don't feel well and something happens that the healthy Carmen could fall down a rabbit hole and chase and spend a lot of energy on. If I don't feel well someday and something happens, I'm like, okay, I give that over to you and I got to move on. I just think his life was a lot about, I got to move on. I got to turn to love. I don't have the energy. I have pain. I got to turn my pain over. I've got to find a way to deal with this. And the other thing I love about him, James, is that he had a 10-year dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
With that PTSD, we don't know if it was what he did in the war, what he saw happen in the war, what happened to him because he was a prisoner of war. Was he, tortured? Who knows? But he does say he practiced the presence then. It came up in him intuitively, and that he did it and did not see immediate results. Because he says throughout, he does that Richard Rohr thing where he says, to quote Richard, Father Richard, he says, it's that easy and that hard. He says throughout, it's facile, it's easy to do the practice of the presence. But he also says, at the beginning, it may be a little difficult. So like, it's kind of like, I always think of the analogy of if you are trying to start flossing your teeth in your teenage years, it may be hard at first, but now at my age, I can't go to bed at night without flossing my teeth. It becomes, but so yeah, you're absolutely, I just think, James, you understand Brother Lawrence so well. And the other thing is the way his practice grew from his trauma and from his disability. That to me is that it's all one piece. His mind didn't separate soul, body, spirit, but when he talks of stumblings, imagine somebody writing about stumblings who is somebody who limps through life for 50 years. It's really profound to me.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate your book so much, and I appreciate the things I learned about Brother Lawrence, and I always loved him, but I feel like I encountered him in a different way. And I love that you started with Brother Lawrence's words. We don't have to go into this, but about 40% of the book is Brother Lawrence, about 40 is Joseph Beaufort, and about 20 is a conversation between them. And a lot of times when you pick up Brother Lawrence and you think, okay, I'm going to read Brother Lawrence, and all of a sudden you're reading about Brother Lawrence, and you're like, what am I reading? And you started with the spiritual maxims, and I seriously, I encountered him in a different way in those, and you talk about his intelligence is that those are there's a literary craft and how they come together, and how the maxims relate to one another. They're not just, independent aphorisms. It's beautifully written, and of course beautifully translated by you. Um, we could talk about that. We could talk about where other translators have hidden the feminine imagery that Brother Lawrence uses. But I kind of want readers to pick up your book and discover those things.
I understand.
But I do want to ask, how do you practice the presence that you find that Brother Lawrence speaks about?
I can tell you, because it's not rocket science. So, in fact, one of the reasons I'm grateful to have translated Brother Lawrence was it made visible for me the gold in my shadow. So, you know how we all have shadow work we have to do with the difficult and the unseen sort of impulses and wounds and such. But I also have experienced the gold in my shadow that I cannot see. And one of the things that happened to me in, as you said earlier, communing with Brother Lawrence was I was like, oh my God, I do this. You would think I would have had that figured out, James, but yeah. And so it was like I had a buddy that helped me see that I do this too. So one of the ways that I practice the presence is, for example, I turned to my editor and said, how should I order the book? Everybody has it different ways, and it often starts with the eulogy even.
Yeah.
I mean, and then I was like, all I could think of was, this is really important to the book, whatever decision that I make here, because my editor said, Carmen, it's up to you. I thought she might go, oh, you need to do this, and she would know, but no. And so I say, so, hey, love God, whatever, or just, hey. So I just don't know what to do with how to order the book. And, a lot of people have this first, and in having this little conversation, which could take a nanosecond or could take a few minutes in the marsh walking along, all of a sudden I was like, you know what? Brother Lawrence is full of life. I really don't want to start with a eulogy, because then we don't get to experience him as an alive human being. It's more like he's dead and he lived a great life. And so I thought, man, this is kind of a downer, And then I thought, you know what, Carmen? It became then it's like one of those things like, what do you call it? Like the little cat eyes in the road that help us know where the road is in the night. Who had that idea? Why didn't we have it sooner? All of a sudden I was like, well, you started with his maxims in his letters. Why wouldn't you start the book with, why wouldn't you put his voice up front? Or like when I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going to because I'm totally a person with severe anxiety. I mean, it's gotten much better, but, it's still a fact of my life. And I'm thinking I'm going to have a conversation with James. I really respect James. James is a brilliant reader, and I also want to do well for his podcast. So I have this moment where I'm like, so throughout the time beforehand, will you show me what James and I should talk about? What should I say when James, I actually say, what should I say? How should I be? And even how should I prepare? So I printed out our Twitter threads and read it, not to memorize anything, but just to follow whatever. So it's kind of like I throw the toast out there, so to speak, and it comes back with jam or something. But I literally I spend a lot of my prayers are more like really short. And Brother Lawrence even says, you would be surprised, he says, the things that are said between a person and God in these short turnings to love. So I think what he meant was occasionally when he first started working in the kitchen, which he very much had an aversion to, that he was saying at the beginning, I hate making soup, God, I hate it. Like it could have been something like that. And could you help me learn to do this with love? Or just, what do I do with this? I don't want to be here. I'm limping. I'm in the kitchen. Because that is kind of how my prayers often are. They're more things of like, what do I do? Like I often think my favorite prayers are help, like just help.
Yeah.
And what do I do? Like, what do I do with this? And they're not long. They're not eloquent. It's just those, and they happen repeatedly throughout the day.
Yeah.
as often. And then when I forget and I start getting into the mind thing, James, of like I have a list and I'm going to get it done and I'm going to fix things, because there's also that part. Then, just like Brother Lawrence says, when you forget, when he forgot, he said, and when I'd remember and come back, there's always a welcome there, a radical welcome there of like, it's not like, where were you? Why weren't you in church on Wednesday? It's not like that. It's more like, you're back. That's all. It's like when you come into the house and your cat is like, yay, or a dog or whatever. It's just this radical welcome, right? Yeah, like you're back. Yay.
Yeah.
You were using your mind trying to fix things and now you're back. So I definitely think for me, it just looks very much like, or if I'm washing dishes, or it might be learning, like I have these few Buddhist chants that really help me, and might be doing that. Or it might be when I'm with a student and I don't really quite know what to do, like if there's a difficulty, if a student's having a difficulty, or if maybe there's some difficulty, like, with a student, then I'm just like, I really will say sometimes, I don't know what to do with this. You're going to have to help me because I got no clue.
Yeah.
Like literally, like you're going to have to, fix this in the sense of show me what to do, because I can't fix it. I don't know. So my conversations might not be safe for, certain circles sometimes, because they might be raw. You know what I'm saying? That might be a prayer for me that some people might not quite approve of, but God has no problem with. And if there is a problem with something I've said, it's not the way a human would look at it. It's more like, I'm sorry that you hurt there, and let's see, couldn't we do it a healthier way? It's like, it's never from the perspective of you're wrong and bad. Never. Yeah. No.
I like the idea of the sentence prayers is what Brother Lawrence commends, right? To say, my God, I'm all yours.
Yeah.
Just that that turning, and it was the cloud that says do the one sentence prayers, or one word prayers, I mean, where something just like help. If you're drowning, you don't say,
I love
please help me out of the marsh. But
I love that. Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things, because I always used to tell students, if there's a building that's on fire, you don't say, assist me, conflagration. It's just help. There's a fire. So yeah, I'm with you on on totally. And I like that you brought up that he does give, because it was like people did ask him for advice.
Yeah.
And he does say that. He says, like, my God, I'm all yours, or love, give me your loving heart, and then he says, or whatever love gives you, whatever you make up with love on the spot. I love that he does occasionally. I think people did say, I think often people came to him and said, how can we have what you have? And they wanted to have it quantified. And so I think he did say, share things like that. Like you said, the one sentence or the one word or definitely, James. Yeah. He definitely, but what I love about him is that he practiced what he did talk. And I love the fact that he's a bit like, what's the word? When you meet an older person who's wise, there's a few things they always bring up that they really care about in a conversation. With Brother Lawrence, it's always, in his letters, I know I'm always talking about practicing the presence, but it's if I were a preacher, he said, it's the only thing I'd ever talk about. And he almost like apologizes, saying, I know I'm telling you this again, but it's the only game in town for him, And I love the fact that he says, because I don't know if I should share this, but I've often gone to retreats and things like that, thinking I'm going to have this big moment, it's going to be great. And then I sort of sit there going, like, I'm kind of like antsy or what. And he says he would much prefer to be practicing the presence than going on his spiritual retreats. He said he's very, I'm not against spiritual retreats, but I'm just saying he's very much like, I think he would even say at the end, he'd rather be in the kitchen stirring the soup and having that moment of prayer, stirring the soup, because he learned to do the small things with great love. Mm-hmm. So I love that, because it's too tiring for me to try to be good and magnanimous. And it'd be much better if I could learn to be patient with my students and helpful and listen to my students. So my prayers are often in class. What do I do now? How do I help this student? And for me, it's bridging the gap of generations. So I'm of the age now when I make certain references to pop culture, they're like, who, what, how, when. And so a lot of my prayers are like, how do I communicate with students who are Gen Z who have so much to share, so much to contribute to the world, and the world's not always listening. Yeah, that's what I've come to.
Well, and that brings us into and you actually say this in one of your notes, but attention. So the stretching towards others, and that is the gift of Brother Lawrence. Is first intention is that of this intending to turn to God, and attention of being aware of the presence of God in our midst, and I think that extends to being aware of the people that are put there. And if you read his letters, he is really attentive to them.
Yes, he is very attentive always, and I love the fact that you emphasize his first the intention, the turning within, the stretching, as you put it with the etymology, the stretching within, and then the stretching outwards, the turning outwards towards others, because Joseph also tells us that he did all he could to help the poor. I mean, he himself, Brother Lawrence, took a vow of poverty, lived in sandals, had owned nothing, and such. So he did live that path of poverty. And I love the fact that you bring in, it's not really a spiritual practice if it's meant just to cultivate some peace for myself. That's just hard to imagine how that would work. So yes, it's that self-compassion by turning to love within, and then that turning to others to try to invite in anyone who's on the margins of society, and also whatever we can do to be love in our time, that stretching outward. So I love the fact that you bring that in, because I just think for me, and I know for several people have brought this to me, we do need more self-compassion in order to be that compassionate reaching out, and to do it in a healthy way, not in a way to make me feel better, but in a way that's or to try to heal, which is not a healthy approach. But I really think what Brother Lawrence practiced really did both those. It cultivated his self-compassion and his compassion for others. And it does it for me too. It really does. It's one of those things. It's like flossing your teeth really does work. We don't have to analyze it from an intellectual point of view. You just know it does do what he says it does. And it's hard to explain it. I think you're one of the most articulate people about this, because you're able to articulate it, James. And you go from his life and his biography to his use of words. And so you take in all of this and make it, and spiritually, and make it very multifaceted and embodied. And so I really appreciate your approach.
Well, thank you. I think we probably should close, but I want to ask a final question, and you may have answered this already, but you talk about the work of translating, and you've talked about some of the things that you practice, and I just wanted to ask again: is what are the practices that nourish you for your work as a teacher, as a translator, as a mystic, and person on your own spiritual journey? What are the practices that feed your soul?
There are so many because it's such a moving thing, right? So I appreciate your asking me that. But the first thing I thought of when you asked that question was my husband is a very kind person. And so there's that container friendship, just like an anchor, and like unconditional love and all that, for which I'm very grateful. And then there is poetry comes up to mind next. So like Mary Oliver can bless me beyond anything. And it's not just reading her poem and walking away, but reading her poem. I mean, it might even be that I print it out and take it to the marsh and make up a song for it. Not like but just it just happens, right? Because I want it to become a part of me. And so the same with other chants. It might be another, like a scripture verse of some sort, or it might be a Buddhist chant. And I mean, there have been times when I've been in great pain, worried about someone or just my own self. And I have chanted the Buddhist medicine chant in the original and in my own translation of it, which is admittedly done with great, I'm not Lama Yeshe Rose, okay, but with great humility and but to try to make it, not really, but just to try to make it more part of my DNA. So there's singing, there's walking in nature, there's looking at snowy egrets, there is washing of the dishes. And then I must admit, it's not practice, I suppose, but there are some TV shows that I watch that really are popular and stuff sometimes, but that have a message of trying to help others. Like there's community. And then there are tending to my friendships who are so supportive. And then another practice is actually the hardest. And it's something I've been praying always as a teacher, and that is, please help me listen. So I think as a teacher, one of my hardest, most important foundations has been, I remember the first day of walking to class in Georgia when I started teaching at a college there, feeling so terrified. I felt like I was walking into a lion's den, and the students were kind. It wasn't to do with them, but I just was so terrified. And I taught before at the University of Georgia, but this was just a little bit different. And I just remember saying, help me please to listen. And something in me went, right, that's it. That's what you've got to focus on. And so one of my practices is having the prayer of, how do I listen to my students today? And what it has turned out to mean is I do surveys of my students. I have to sometimes laugh at myself in class when I don't get something, like there are moments where you have to be vulnerable before your students of just like, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't get that, or, okay, I messed up there, and so, but really and truly there's taking in of reading. It's all the things that I majored in English for. There have been books that have saved me. So for example, I have read so much of Anne Ulanov and Melanie Klein and Carl Jung. I've read so much for my own healing, during therapy, before therapy, after therapy. So reading is another practice. People say, yeah, I love to read, but reading, so active listening as a practice, reading as a practice. And I know Anne Lamott said this before, if I'm at a point where I'm feeling particularly like vulnerable or just exhausted, then also rest is a practice. Oh. You're supposed to rest during every day, but also there are some times when you just have to say, whoa, I've got to just sit here a moment. And that's a practice. And so, the other thing is sometimes when I feel depleted, reading and just reading can be filling me up, but I have to find, or it's listening to music. But yeah, for me, or writing, and that's the other one. There are so for me, James, it's like, and there's also writing. So I have this book of poetry I've never written, and the other day I went back and I gathered all the poems again, and so I've been working with this forever. But I realized that for me, what's most important is the going back into the poems and working with them even more than the publishing them. So for me, writing, journaling is a practice too. And I was listening the other day to Mirabai Starr speak, and she was saying how she has on her phone a list of prompts that sometimes she'll just stop and have a 5-minute free write to a prompt that kind of gets her back in touch with herself. And I'll do that sometimes too, go back into a poem and go, what did I mean here? And check in with myself, because I can actually listen better to my students if I've paid some attention to myself, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And
that's such a question.
Oh, I want to say that, I mean, this is interesting, is because this is all things that Brother Lawrence talks about in terms of listening and rest and paying attention. And they're all things that in our distracted day and age that are kind of hard to do. It is harder for me to stop and listen to myself than to, check Twitter or Facebook.
Agree.
So it is, but it is the work. So,
and I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I do get the feeling that we're all addicted to social media, in the sense of, it's just so your thumbs move. I mean, it's just, or you're on the computer, but on the phone. And I think that stopping is, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I do think that we're in a new age of, how do we deal with this? What does it mean? I ask my students all the time, what does it mean to be human? Like, in a world where you have the AI and the social media, what does it mean to be human? But I'm always asking myself too, because it would be much easier to kind of, how C.S. Lewis has that thing where there's a head in a jar. I mean, it would be much, in one of his science fiction stories, there's the point I got from it, and I may be misremembering it, but it's kind of like it would be much easier to just inhabit social media and kind of just be on my phone with my thumbs moving than it is to try to be embodied, feet on the ground, and being there for people that I love, and having my heart open to be broken. In grief and things, and just being open to be. I've just become more aware lately. We've got to learn, and I'm starting with myself. I'm talking meaning I've got to learn, and it seems the world needs to relearn or unlearn how to be there for each other, especially, as you say, as we're kind of all pulled into these social media spaces. And I'm not against the social media spaces. Because, that's how I met you, James. But I mean, it's definitely a new thing we're dealing with.
Yeah. It's how we all survived the pandemic too. And for a lot of us, that was our connection to the world. But thank you, Carmen, for talking with me and getting deeper into all of this. Where can we send people to get your book?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd love for people to visit me on my website. It's www.carmenbutcher.com, and you can find out there. It's really sold anywhere. And I would love to. One of the things, James, I've really appreciated about you is that it has enriched my understanding of Brother Lawrence, hearing what you saw in the book. Because it just tells you how much we need each other's friendships, because some of the things you pointed out, I don't think I would have understood without your pointing them out. You're an excellent reader, such an embodied reader. You're like the dream reader, really, and I know you do so many other things too. So thank you so much, James.
Thank you. I enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Carmen Acevedo Butcher so much. Carmen shared so many rich things, and yet there's so much about Brother Lawrence and her wonderful, evocative, and inclusive translation we barely scratched the surface on. You can get her book anywhere books are sold, but especially from your local independent bookseller. Please visit her online at carmenbutcher.com. The link will be in the show notes. The music for this podcast has been Lawrence Gray's Laundromatted. licensed through Creative Commons. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep practicing.